Alrighty, just wanted to start off. First off, really excited to be talking about this topic today. But before I jump into that, I just wanted to say that when I came to Kazakhstan and when I was invited to speak here, I really didn't know what to expect. But seeing the energy here, the ambition, the things that are going on at SmartPoint and how everybody's hustling, it really feels like to me, how do I use this? Okay, anyways, it really feels like I'm right at home. And so, what's home? I'm from San Francisco. I work for a company called ProsperWorks. We're the CRM partnered with Google. I'm a product manager, and specifically, my team owns the mobile platform. And so, this topic here, how to build products customers love, it's a really broad topic. There's no way that I can get into all the little granular details, but what I do want to share from my learnings in Silicon Valley is really how to execute this vision from a high-level standpoint, the perspective, the philosophy, the sort of team and organization that you need to do this right. And so just wanted to share the story of ProsperWorks because we have been able to do this very well and the market has responded. ProsperWorks, our mission is to be the engine of prosperity. So if you don't know what a CRM system is, a CRM is a customer relationship management tool. It's for salespeople, business development people, like Aleshar uses this. Many of you out here are using some kind of CRM system or maybe even Excel. So we entered the space to really become the core platform that then drives revenue and optimizes it, helps you manage that for your business. We've been successful. We were able to create a strong partnership with Google. We're the CRM recommended by them. We're used by them. They invest in us. And we've been their launch partner for 5 product launches. And we've been so successful in just 4 years of being commercially available. We were able to raise $87 million in financing from top venture firms. Google Ventures is there, Storm Ventures, among many other greats. And so for many of you, you probably don't know what CRM is and how products that customers love to use really ties into this. So I'm just going to give you a brief definition. So CRM really, it does 2 basic things. People use it, they put data into it, it's a database, and then the information is then used to drive insights like reporting, what actions a salesperson should do next, or what the business as a whole should be doing next based on their revenue models. However, 47% of CRM implementations fail. This is the Forrester Group report. It's a very well-respected market research group. And they were able to find that 47% of CRM implementations fail due to failure of adoption, not because the system itself was bad functionally, but because people found it hard to use. When you have 47% of any CRM implementation failing, last year, the CRM market was $40 billion. That means $20 billion is just down the drain and a costly business decision because they weren't able to actually use it to any real effect. And so some of the reasons that they found, it's not integrated into your workflow as a business person. It's very clunky. It's hard to use, and it's very expensive to set up. And so what would happen is salespeople would go in their day-to-day. They want to talk to customers. They want to close deals. Instead, what happens is they have to spend so much time maintaining this, and then sales leaders have to spend so much time asking people for the reports, putting this all together. And ultimately, it's bad data that's going into the system because no one cares to put in the right information. And then what you get in the end is bad insights coming out, right? You have garbage going in. What kind of insight can you get? You just got garbage coming out. So what we did with ProsperWorks is we really focused on reinventing what a CRM should be. And we went to the ground level of, well, if you need good data into the system, what better way is there? You know, there's no technology yet to like mind transfer your thoughts. So the next best thing is just making it easy to use, making that interface as simple and easy to use as possible. So on the left here, we have Salesforce, very well-respected CRM. I applaud them. They pioneered moving technology and business software to the cloud. And so if you're not familiar with that, basically it used to be that you have to, if you want to install software for your company, you get a CD, you install it, 2 years later it's out of date, you have to go buy another CD, install it. it's buggy. You have to have a team that manages this. It's super expensive. And so what they did was they're just like, we're going to put it in the cloud and it just gets updated constantly and you just pay a subscription. So that's like freaking genius, and they're very one of the great companies in Silicon Valley for that. But there's still room for innovation, as we were able to find. And so just from a UI UX standpoint, what we did was, okay, everything's in the cloud now. Let's make it not still look like it's from the 90s. And if you're looking at the left side here, this is like a traditional CRM. Really not that much different from Excel. It kind of hurts me to just look at that and imagine trying to use that, especially just business development people, sales people. And so on the right side here, just looking at our system, it's much more simpler, it's easier to digest, and we make it as intuitive as possible. And so we also did other things, from really understanding the customer and what they do, how these people operate. Well, 50% of their day is sitting inside of their Gmail. Why don't we just bring our system into your email? So traditionally, if you use QuickBooks, or, well, not QuickBooks, but if you use business software, you are likely having your Gmail open here, a spreadsheet open here, an application open here. None of them talk to each other. You're like flipping between them, and you lose data. So what we did was we just brought the system into the existing workflow that you have to integrate that. And in addition to that, we also automate the data entry. So not only do you not have to input your data manually, many systems you still have to do this. You talk to somebody, you want to close a deal, but then wait a second, and then you just like type in all this information. You got to wait so long before you can actually take the next action, which is talking to the customer again, or taking their money. With us, it was just single click. If somebody sends you an email and you don't have them in the system, you just like hover over their email address. We'll pull in their full profile, their Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. We'll also pull in all the past email correspondence that you have with them automatically. It's just a no-brainer. You click one button, the system does the work for you. So the purpose of this is not to sell ProsperWorks. It's really talking about this trend that's transforming software, and not just software, but any kind of customer experience where having a good experience is critical for having a repeat customer. So it doesn't just apply to technology. This also applies to medical centers, coffee shops. I'll go into that later on about these principles being applied just generally overall. So you don't have to be a software developer. You could be working in other spaces, but these things matter. And the trend that I'm describing is called the consumerization of software. So in the last decade, there's been a major fundamental shift in digital technology, and the cost of digital technology has dropped exponentially. And so what that means is cheaper enterprise software. If you have cheaper enterprise software, that means you have more software in the hands of other people. And the people that are using the system now are the same people using Facebook, they're using WhatsApp, they're using VK, Google Maps, etc. And so they have an expectation of a great experience with these applications, that these are the same people that are going to be working in the workforce, and they're going to be using your software, or they're going to be visiting your clinic or visiting the government agency. I'm not sure if this is the same way here, but when I go to the government agency in the US, it's like I went 30 years back in time, and it's such a painful experience. And so this trend applies to business software and all those other areas that I mentioned. So ultimately, the trend right now in Silicon Valley is UI UX. That's user interface and user experience. And that UI UX can give you the strong competitive advantage, you know, from 2010 onwards to really disrupt the space. And that's the ProsperWorks story that I was telling you earlier. How do you actually do this though? Like, how do you actually build how do you actually build products that customers love to use? It's not as simple as getting a great designer or making your app look pretty. It really requires organizational effort. It's an organization-wide structure that you need and a way of thinking. And at the core of that is the product manager. So if you're not familiar with that, I'm a product manager, so you can talk to me right after, but real quickly, it is a relatively new role. What product managers do is evaluate product opportunities and determine what needs to be built next to drive maximum impact. They are ultimately accountable for the success of the product, right? Every business is dependent on their customers. Those customers use an application that was built by a product team, and that product team was driven by a product manager who dug deep into all the data, all the other business units, sales, marketing, finance, business analysts, operations, market research, and competitive reviews. But in my opinion, the most important component is customer feedback directly from the customers themselves. And so I had a workshop earlier today for customer discovery. I went into detail about that. I'm not going to do that here. But basically, you're supposed to take all these inputs and really understand the customer pain to then think about innovative solutions. That's what you need to do as a PM. Now, there was an older style of how you built products. It could be furniture, it could be software, it could be anything, building anything. And the way it used to be was that marketing, sales, consultants, they would talk to the customer, they would ask them what they wanted, which is probably the worst thing you can do is just ask them what they want. But they built these detailed requirements up front. And then these detailed requirements, it's like a piece of paper that had all these little details, would be handed over to the developers who never actually spoke to the customers themselves. And so the only thing they're referencing is like this translation from somebody else. If you're lucky, there was a designer. And then the engineers would plan for many months or even years before the product would even reach the customer. So a lot of time would pass while they're working on this thing. There's a lot of things that can happen in even just 6 months. And then additionally, these aren't cross-functional units. These departments are siloed. Sales is over there, marketing is over there, engineering is over there, design is over here, etc. And ultimately, what this would result in is something like this, where this is the customer explaining what they wanted. This is how design understood what needed to be done. This is how the engineers actually wrote the thing. This is how the consultant or the salespeople were selling it. And then this is what the customer was actually built, because after a year before this product was even finished, they would come back and say, actually, we need something different, right? And then now the salespeople are like, oh my God, I don't want to lose this deal, so engineer, you have to build it this way. And then you're just like, I can't do that, but okay. And now it's another 6 months and just budget overruns. It's just crazy. So that's the old way. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of this concept of Agile today. The funny thing is that there's a lot of companies that claim that they're Agile, but they are still very much in this motion of Waterfall. Structurally, on paper, it looks different, but I'm going to go into the details of why they're still Waterfall and why, if it's still that way, you cannot build great UI and UX in your product. So this new product development model, it's called Agile. Typically, what you do, even before you prioritize the problem, you identify the target segment that you want to go after, the type of customer, maybe someone that likes to drive Mustangs, or you're focused on middle-aged family that has to take their kids from here to the soccer field, to school, etc. And they have different kinds of needs, right? So after you do that, you then prioritize the problem, you define the problem, and then you start building solutions, building prototypes. These green arrows mean you built a prototype, you took it to people to take a look, and then you're like, okay, they hate this thing, so let's retry it. Which is okay, because you build a prototype, it's very cheap. You're not putting 10 engineers, a designer, and QA analysts, and all this other structure to then spend the next month building something. That's very expensive. So you prototype, that's what the green is supposed to represent. And then you can even go as far as engineering it and then doing the same thing until it's finally ready for launch. All right, so the advantage of the Agile method is that you have much more shorter development cycles, and we call these sprints. And this concept of sprint is not just applied to software. This is being applied to all sorts of organizations now. I mean, so in the waterfall method, right, it would take 6 months, even longer than that, before the system or whatever it is that you're building even went to a customer. Now, you can do it in 2 weeks. Maybe if you're a little bit slower, it takes a month, but it's already to the customer. They can give you your feedback, and then you can say, okay, we either drop this or we build something different. You're able to prototype to really get a better understanding of what customers need and if your solution is solving that. And it's a much more flexible structure, but it can still be waterfall. And so these numbers that I'm putting down here these are different stages that you're trying to develop that you're developing the product under. If you have zeros on prioritizing the problem, zeros on defining the problem, you're not doing any customer discovery, you're not talking to customers, you think that you know more than them. We call this the important person syndrome. Usually, if you have good product people, good engineers, they're like, we want to understand what the customer actually needs. Not what they say they want, but what is the real pain, understand that, and see if we can apply new technologies or new designs to solve that need, not just copy somebody else. But instead, you have this really important person, maybe the CEO or something like that, who's just like, I have this idea, just do it. And so then everybody's just like trapped on this roller coaster of death, and they go straight to designing the solution, building the solution, and then they build this pet project that nobody ever wanted. And then you waste. So what happens with that? Lots of resources get wasted, and you have an incredibly high failure rate. Even if you have a structure like this, where some amount of time is being spent to prioritize that problem, to understand the problems, and then you go so you spend a lot of time up front before you start designing a system, this can still be waterfall. Because the information gets passed in a waterfall style. You have one guy that just controls the feedback. I'm talking to the customers, and he might not even doing anything. And then he goes to the designer and says, okay, we got to build this. The designer has no say in what's being built. They just have to make it look pretty. Then the designer goes and passes that over to engineering, and engineer's like, we can't even build this thing that you designed, and they have to make compromises to have a really crappy solution. You can feel when you use some applications, they're really slow and buggy. That's as a result of this. And then engineer passes that to QA, and then it gets to the customer, and it's this long, painful cycle. This results in what's called lipstick on a pig. So here's an image of a lipstick on a pig. It doesn't matter how much lipstick or makeup or whatever you do to try to make this pig pretty, it's still a freaking pig. And that's because of that waterfall style of the information going from the PM, then to design, then to engineering. It's not a collaborative experience. But there is a better way. And really, I just want to strike home that in order to take advantage of UI UX being the competitive edge of our current generation of software or just any kind of experience, you cannot do it with those old ways, even if you call it Agile. The ideal state, you spend a lot of time up front prioritizing the problem, understanding it, and then you spend, of course, time designing and building the solution. But because you spent so much of that time up front, you've really de-risked, right? Really minimized, really narrowed down to what really should be closer to the right. It's not perfect, but you're not always going to get it every time. But you've really minimized the risk that when you start to throw your engineers and everybody else at it, and then sales, and then marketing at it, that you're doing the right thing. In addition, you are really thinking about the problem and not the solution. So when you go back to the problem, you're able to really understand and figure out if there's a better way than what we're doing right now, instead of just trying to copy what other people are doing or just improve what other people are doing. Okay, so I'm going to actually go into this distinction. It's a very high-level concept, but it's the problem space versus the solution space, and why it's important to understand this and apply this in what you do. And if you're not doing it, you go to your boss and say, hey, we got to do this. So basically, the problem space, that describes the customer problem, the actual need that a product can potentially address. We also call it the product requirement. The solution space is the specific implementation using technology or some kind of design that then fills that need or the requirement. An example would be the ability to write in space. So for a problem space, back in the 50s, NASA was trying to figure out the best way to really enable astronauts to do their work. And one of the things is that they need to be able to take notes. They need to be able to write things down because they're the same kind of people doing the same kind of work. They're just up in space. However, when you're in space, pens don't work. Regular pens don't work in space because they rely on gravity. I'm sure if you've ever tried writing on the wall or something like that upside down and you're like, it stopped writing, but the ink is there, it's because the gravity is pulling the ink away from the tip. So obviously that wouldn't work in space. So there was a contractor that NASA used. They spent 6 months developing this cutting edge, top of the line type of space pen. They poured in more than $1 million in R&D back in the 50s and 60s. That's a lot of money. And then they built this space pen that NASA was able to use. In Russia, they thought about this and then decided to use a pencil. Yeah. So, now there's some caveats to this story. It turns out there are actually good reasons not to use a pencil in space. They are flammable. Also, the little pieces can break and then they float around and like fall into electronics, and really bad things can happen. But it did work initially. The real point here is to make that distinction between what happens when you just think about the solution first only, as opposed to thinking about the problem and understanding that problem. So going to the ideal state, there's more things that you can do here. At our company, we have cross-functional pods. And so what that means is I have a team of 6 engineers, 1 engineering manager, a designer, 3 QA. We all sit together. It's not that QA department's over there, engineering department's over there, designers are over there, and I'm sitting here talking to nobody. We're all in there together, and we all join the conversations from the very beginning about understanding the customer problem. Obviously, people need to build things, so we set up the structure so that I'm on the call, my designers are on those calls with customers, and then we always invite engineers, we always invite others to join the call. It's not just because it's cool and collaborative and feels good. There are many benefits to doing this. One, they understand the problem better. Usually engineers, they're not using a CRM software because the engineer is not selling. If they are selling, that is probably a dangerous situation for your company if an engineer is selling your product. So they will never touch that. Maybe if you're lucky and you're somewhere at like Facebook or VK, the engineer, of course they use VK usually, so they kind of understand it. But most of the time, you're building something that they're not going to really understand fully. So when they're in there early, you get their buy-in earlier, they understand it better. And they can even think about solutions or think about the problem in a way different from you as a PM. They're much more closer to new technologies, things of that nature. So what this enables is them thinking about, hey, you know, there's something that we actually already did over there. It doesn't look like this, but underneath, because it's software, it's the same thing. So let's just use that, as opposed to going through this whole painful cycle, and then now the engineer's kind of cornered into this situation that they can't do that, and you have this expensive problem. So all members are involved from beginning to end. We're cross-functional. That opens up tremendous opportunity for innovation. And like I mentioned earlier, that versatility of applying this kind of a product development process, it's not just applied to software. I know Netflix is on there. Before Netflix was the online browser that you use, it used to be this CD, like you have to subscribe to them and then, or go online and order the thing, and then they would ship it to you. This was a manual process, and they made a huge pivot before they moved to the online platform that was determined from this process of really understanding the customer and being able to think about a new solution to the way they were working. They were running out of money, and then they just, sky's the limit. And you know, all of you are probably using Netflix now. BBC News, they did the same thing. One Medical is a medical clinic. Right now in San Francisco, they're one of the most popular medical clinics that you can go to because they've transformed that experience that you have when you're a patient going to your doctor. Blue Bottle Coffee, you already had Starbucks, you already had all these established coffee shops, and then Blue Bottle came in, applied this kind of thinking, and they're really able to radically transform expectations people have about what coffee and what going to a coffee place is supposed to be and what that experience is supposed to be like. And they're really able to tap into the artistry. There's a lot of people that are designers, a lot of people that are working, that they want to be in an environment that just maximizes their creativity. And Blue Bottle Coffee, part of their value proposition is delivering that experience. And it's just like it's spreading like wildfire. That's pretty much the value of this process that I'm describing to you. And I hope I was able to communicate to you these trends that are going on in Silicon Valley. the current stage that we're at is that UI UX is the competitive advantage for anything that you're trying to do. Maybe there's plenty of companies here are already applying this concept, but if you are not, I hope you're able to learn something and incorporate this perspective. And there's a couple people that I just wanted to recommend if you want to learn more about this. One is a book. It's called, I don't have my backpack with me here, but it's called Sprint. How to Run a Sprint in 5 Days. If you go to Amazon or Google this, it's like a blue book. A lot of what I understand comes from that. Another one is called Inspired by Marty Kagan. This guy is like the gangster OG of product development in Silicon Valley right now. He is the thought leader to understand how to build products the right way. He's part of he's the managing director of the Silicon Valley Product Group. So you can subscribe to them, you can learn about them, you can see the things that they're doing, not just for technology, but for any kind of experience. And then also Dan Olson. The book is called The Lean Product Process. And so I met him, incredible guy. He actually he explains in his book the detailed way of actually doing these things. I'm describing the high level, but he's telling you it's like a manual that you can use to execute in your day-to-day. I use that as a reference every day. And that's it. I hope this was helpful for you guys. And if you have any questions, if we have time for questions, please feel free to ask me. And I'll also be hanging around here, so you can just come up to me personally.